Thanks, Kirk. That was great to hear about all that modeling work and how it's being applied from a transportation infrastructure sense. So our next presentation is by Mark Lickus. Mark is a project hydrologist in MaineDOT Environmental Office, where he's worked in the Surface Water Resources Group since 2009. His current duties focus on aquatic organism passage at road stream crossings and hydrology studies, stream geomorphic assessments, wetlands and tidal restoration, preliminary fish passage design development, and environmental construction support for culvert and bridge projects. His master's from Yale School of Forestry and a bachelor's in geology from University of Colorado. And his presentation is called Resiliency in Action, Aging Infrastructure, Highway Flooding, and Coastal Marsh Restoration at Back River Creek in Woolwich, Maine. Mark.
Thanks, Pete. Let's see here. All right. Okay. Yeah, the title here is a little different than what Pete just said, but just kind of summarized same thing. So we're going to now I'm going to just talk about a project. So from the big picture down to a really site level kind of presentation here. So this is about a DOT project along Route 1 in Woolwich that started as a challenging but a relatively straightforward bridge replacement project. But as is often the case in coastal settings in Maine and elsewhere, there are other factors that at the site that ended up adding to the complexity, including an aging town culvert, roadway flooding, a tidally restricted coastal marsh, newly adopted state sea level rise guidance, and also multiple stakeholders with a range of interests. So balancing infrastructure resiliency work with the growing interest in tidal marsh restoration by other organizations and agencies in the state is an ongoing challenge at DOT. And so this project provides, one example of how that balance was achieved at this site and how it produced a project that is now under construction. So I have to move along here. This will be an overview. I'll talk about the site a little bit, and then our bridge project, a feasibility study that was also done. These projects were sort of interconnected, going along at the same time. And then next, I'll show some of the information produced by this study that was used to inform a change in the scope of the bridge project. And then I'll close with a little bit about some future marsh restoration work that's planned. So the Back River Creek Marsh is in Woolwich, Maine. It's located just east of the Kennebec River up Route 1. It's a 140-acre marsh. The creek is along the eastern side here. Let's see, Route 1 runs along the southerly edge here. And if you're familiar with the Taste of Maine restaurant, that's located right down here near the southwest corner. There's also, let's see, the marsh drains to Pleasant Cove down here, and then to the Kennebec, which is about a mile downstream. And that's the Kennebec is over here on the left-hand side of the image. The marsh is separated into upper and lower parts by the Rockland Branch Railroad, which runs up the marsh and then crosses over in the middle. That's the lower part is now a state-owned wildlife management area. And tidal flow is restricted by some culverts that are in the area circled in red. And that's the area I'm going to focus on for the rest of this talk. So this slide shows that the southerly part of the marsh. And so Pleasant Cove is on the bottom. And this is a low tide image, so you can see how well defined the channel is going through this area. But then as you go up above the crossings, it widens out into these more impounded areas. On an unmaintained 1830s era dike runs along the north side of Pleasant Cove. And then just north of that is the Route 1 crossing. It's about 2,000 feet long. On the lower left is the Station 46 bridge going over the railroad and part of the marsh. Up here are some culverts at the creek. that are 4 to 6 feet in diameter. And then the triangle shows the low point on Route 1 that floods periodically. And I'll talk more about that in a little bit. And then this road that diverges off to the right is called George Wright Road. That's a town road. In that road is a culvert that's also pretty old, a 1930s vintage, that's in poor condition. And just to make things even more interesting, there's a water line that runs over the culvert and through the old dike. And then there's a boat launch that's right next to the culvert as well. So next, I'll just talk a little bit about the Station 46 Bridge project that started this off. So this bridge was built back in the 1930s when Route 1 was built through this area. It's been rehabbed since then, but it's a steel bridge. It's almost 700 feet long. And it was determined to be structurally deficient, very poor condition. So the scope for the project was a full replacement, but with only some limited approach work. Traffic in this area is extremely high, almost 19,000 vehicles per day. That's higher than some parts of the interstate in Maine. And so there was a significant design challenge as part of this, which was maintaining two-way traffic during the construction. And so there was so a temporary bridge and roadway was going to have to be included as part of the design. And the bridge is fairly high though, and so there was no need to raise the grade of this bridge to address sea level rise concerns. And then this was because of the importance of Route 1 to the mid-coast economy. DOT received a $25 million federal highway build grant to help with the construction cost. And but that came with a commitment that DOT had to make to advertise the project by the fall of 2021. My timer here. Okay, so next, some of the site conditions. So we'll start with the tidal restriction. So here's a plot of some of the water level data that's been collected out at that site over the years. And this is going to show the difference in the tidal range in the marsh versus downstream in the cove. The brown and the kind of green, light blue line there is a water level upstream of Route 1 and George Wright Road. The blue line is the water level in Pleasant Cove, and then the yellow is from the Portland tide gauge, kind of just for reference. What I really want to point out is that this shows that the tidal range in the marsh itself is less than half of that in the cove. And then the other point is that the biggest difference is really on the bottom part of the curve. And so that shows that the marsh doesn't fully drain on an outgoing tide. So from the perspective of agencies like the Fish and Wildlife Service and NOAA, this has led to a degraded habitat quality in the marsh. And especially when you compare that to some of the brackish tidal marshes, which are in the Pleasant Cove area. So as a result, there's also a fish passage concern at this site, like a lot of others. But anyway, as a result, there's been a long-term interest in restoring tides to this area to improve the habitat quality and now to make the marsh more resilient to sea level rise. So here's a few photos showing the crossings and the culverts that restrict the flow. The images on the left are of the old Woolwich dike, from the late 1800s and early 1900s. In the middle, these are photos right at the George Wright Road culvert, taken on the Pleasant Cove side, on the ocean side. The top one is an incoming tide, and you can see the twin whirlpools that have formed there. The bottom is on an outgoing tide, and you can see the fast flow and the turbulence. And those conditions often impact the ability to use the boat launch, which is right next door. And then on the right, on the top is the area between George Wright Road and Route 1. And you can just see two of the culverts that are under Route 1. There's a third one there, but it's always submerged and you never see it. And then the bottom shows some of the ponding that can happen on the upstream side. Another significant issue here is the flooding at Route 1 and George Wright Road. And so this occurs when you get some of the highest tides and they combine with either some storm surge or high flows in the Kennebec River. And so it's estimated that these are currently 1 to 2 year events, but they'll become much more frequent with sea level rise. So these were taken at 2 different events in 2018 and 2019. And so on the left, you can see water is actually overtopping the old dike. And then on the bottom, it's flowing into that area between Route 1 and George Wright Road. And you can see how little freeboard there is with Route 1 right there. And then in the middle, there's water flowing across the intersection of George Wright Road with Route 1. And then on the right, you can see water is actually creeping up onto the shoulder and a turn lane on Route 1. And then in one event, water went into the northbound lane and actually was crossing over a little bit into the southbound lane. So shift gears and talk a little bit about this second sort of interconnected but sort of parallel project, separate but parallel project, this feasibility study. So the culvert under George Wright Road that's owned by the town is very old. It was put in at the same time as the Station 46 bridge. And it's in very poor condition. And so the town began to take a hard look at what their options were, either replacing it with a much larger structure or possibly even removing the culvert. And so as they started to do that, that kind of got people's attention. And so the stakeholders that were involved here sort of recognized that a couple things. First of all, in order to do successful marsh restoration here, you had to make improvements to both the George Wright Road culvert and the Route 1 culvert. And then secondly, that even 1 foot of sea level rise here would significantly, increase the frequency and extent of roadway flooding in this area. So everybody agreed there was a coordinated effort needed. And so a partnership was formed, and that partnership was led by the Kennebec Estuary Land Trust, or KELT for short. DOT supported that effort. But I have to say our support was somewhat conditional in a couple ways. First of all, we made it clear that DOT's interest out here was the safety and the integrity of Route 1, but that in terms of the marsh restoration, that was a responsibility of other partners. And also along with that, the DOT didn't have funding programmed for any type of restoration work. And so that additional funding would need to be, brought in as part of any effort there. And then finally, if and when any work was done on Route 1, we made it clear that that would become a DOT project, given that it was our structure. So the partnership decided to do a feasibility study to look to examine some alternatives to do tidal restoration in the marsh, and also to improve the infrastructure and marsh resiliency. Let's see, KELT received a grant for that to do the study, but there was no money there for construction. And so okay, so next I'll focus on some of the tasks that were done there. This is the study produced a lot of information, but given limited time, I just can focus on 3 of the most relevant pieces here. I'll start with the soils. So the geotechnical investigation found that there was, under Route 1, there was about 135 feet of both organic wetland and marine clay, wetland soils and marine clay. So this raised some significant concerns about the potential for roadway settlement, and showed that the design was going to require some significant settlement mitigation. In a sense, this effectively limited how much you could raise the roadway grade. Secondly, modeling. We could have a whole session on the modeling, and so I'm just going to really be brief here. But actually, we worked with Kirk's group, and they developed a 2D hydraulic model here that provided information about depth and velocities. So there was a lot of information provided about that was used for the marsh restoration effort, such as different tidal datums, and then depths and extents of flooding for different scenarios under different conditions. The information that was most relevant to the design for Route 1 was the opening size that was needed for a structure and then some of that tidal datum work. So the model, they went through a couple different iterations and came up with a hydraulic opening size of about 420 square feet. And that information, along with some of the other, was passed to our engineering team. And then, so the last task that I'll cover here was developing roadway alternatives. And so in doing that, the team had to balance a number of factors. The geotechnical conditions, obviously, but also just constructability, initial construction cost, the ability to maintain traffic, the ability for the restoration project to proceed by others. And so after a lot of review, the team identified a preferred alternative, which is shown here. It's a profile view through along Route 1. Oops, sorry. This is Station 46 bridge area over here. It's just not detailed on this diagram. So this alternative was selected because it raised the low point of Route 1 about 4 feet, and improving the level of safety for the traveling public and the resiliency of the system here. It replaced 2 of the culverts with an 85-foot span that over the existing channel, which is now called the Pleasant Cove Bridge. And it used a proven design, pile supported integral abutment structure. The site and the profile constraints, limited the freeboard to some extent here. And the raising grade, it was 5 feet at the bridge, but as a result, the design team had to consider some enhanced concrete and other durability measures as part of the design. And then the last thing I'll say is that given the anticipated service life, the designers felt like this design met both DOT's bridge design guidance of considering 4 feet of sea level rise, but also some of the some newly issued guidance by the Maine Climate Council under their commit to manage scenario, which encouraged considering 4 feet of sea level rise as part of design work. So these 2 projects were moving along in parallel until something unexpected happened. And that's what kind of makes this project a little bit unique. So DOT reached a point in the design where the team determined that some refinements to the design itself and the maintenance of traffic plan resulted in some estimated cost savings. And so the question became, could these savings be used to help fund the improvements to Route 1? And that were produced by that feasibility study. And DOT could only consider this because the feasibility had been done and that info was available. If that info hadn't been there, then this discussion never would have happened. So DOT ended up taking that to federal highway and proposed to expand the limits of the Station 46 bridge project and include the Route 1 improvements in that package as a package. And so among other things, this would address the Route 1 flooding issue. It would improve the overall system resiliency through here to sea level rise. And then it would allow the other partners the opportunity to do the tidal marsh restoration project. So after some back and forth, Federal Highway approved this request. And so the design team worked to include the improvements in the bid package and successfully met the 2021 advertised deadline. So oops, sorry, here. Oh, I'm missing a couple slides. Well, sorry about that. I have some photos of the bridge project that's currently underway en route at Station 46. So I'll just summarize that. So in DOT issued put the project out to bid, and then contract was awarded to Reed and Reed of Woolwich, Maine. And the contract amount was $33.5 million. Construction began in early 2022, and I had some great photos, but because the work was designed to minimize traffic impacts, they're currently building a traffic temporary detour to maintain 1 lane of traffic in each direction during the construction of the project. They're currently working on a temporary bridge that's right next to the Station 46 bridge, which is going to be replaced as part of the project. And there's currently a preload section there. They put in a bunch of wick drains and so they can raise the embankment of Route 1. And the work is expected to be completed by June of 2026. And then let's see, last thing I'll say. So once DOT puts in the new opening, it will be up to the partners to complete the restoration. So they're continuing to work on that restoration project, doing a lot of coordination with the town about, what alternative do they want to do with George Wright Road, where that's going to go. And then depending on that, that would affect the water line and possibly the boat launch. So there's a number of moving parts there that they're trying to get worked out. And they're responsible for coordinating all the, all that, and also doing permitting and design and the construction of that. And they're currently applying for funding to do that construction. And I think their goal is to try to complete that, soon after DOT completes this project. And I'm going to acknowledge some of my colleagues at DOT and other partners. And with that, stop there.